Guide Round, outreach worker and tour guide based here at the Red House Glass Cone. Let's have another look at a little bit of glass. Today I want to tell you about the glass tax, or more properly as it was known, the Glass Excise duty that affected all glass manufacture. Here at the Red House Glass Cone we have a travelling leer, a leer that leads through to the Shrower, and this was instrumental in where the glass was assayed to account for the tax. You can see here we have the tecker in, putting the hot glass into the hot end of the travelling leer like a conveyor belt, a mechanical turned by a huge wheel at the side, and the glass travelled through slowly overnight, cooling down as it went. When it got to the cool end of the leer, or the Shrower as it's known, this is where the glass was taken off the conveyor belt. It was inspected for quality, cleaned and packed, ready for the decorating shops, and this was the only area in the factory where women worked. But it's also where the glass tax officer was based, where he took the assay of the glass. The glass tax was first introduced in 1693 by William III, and it was basically a window tax. The Glass Excise tax was introduced in 1745, and it lasted 100 years. This was introduced in the reign of George II, and this included all glass, not just window glass, but even the finest flint glass made in Stourbridge. The Red House Cone was built in 1795, so that was 50 years after the introduction of the glass tax. At the height of it, and the design of this leer helped to minimise the disruption to the production of the glass. The tax was calculated on the weight through the Shrower. It was said to be an unfair tax because the ingredients to make glass were worthless, so it was a tax based on the skill, ingenuity and strength of the glassmaker. When it was introduced, it was £10 a tonne, £2,500, and within 50 years, when the Red House Cone was built, it had tripled to £30 a tonne, or almost £4,000 in today's money. There was an article published in the Lancet that said the glass was the tax was 300% of the actual value of the ingredients of the glass, and it was detrimental to health. It caused a deficiency of light in buildings because people bricked up their windows and didn't let so much light in. This in particular affected the poorer housing. In the glass house itself, in the hot shops, it was inconvenient. It was time consuming. You had to weigh all the materials that were input. At the end of the week, any materials that were left in the pot that were fused and melted also needed to be weighed. So the pots had to be ladled out and all the melt accounted for. Production was stopped during these weighings and measurings, and if you were on piecework when production stopped, you weren't earning any money. Everything that was made also had to be put through the Shrower, even if it was obviously imperfect. It had to be accounted for. By 1825, every glass house had to be licensed, and the licence cost was £1,500 per annum. That's equivalent to £110,000 today. That was an awful lot of money, and it didn't discriminate as to whether you had a huge business with a large turnover or whether you were just a small factory in a back street. £110,000 was a lot of money to find. There were also complex rules around the application of the glass tax, and rules were made more complex to close loopholes that arose. All furnaces, pots, leers, all working areas in the factory had to be numbered and the contents assayed. For the leer itself, there was only one entrance, and it was kept locked with a grid and padlocked. Each factory could only make one product, so it stopped innovation. and you had to notify the excise officer of every operation that went on in the factory. So filling or charging the pots, measuring the ingredients, they needed 12 hours notice for that. And for most of the other operations, such as pot changing, emptying the weighing room, opening ovens, all needed a 6-hour notice. It's said that in many factories, 60 to 70 notices a week were issued to the glass inspector, the glass tax inspector, and they all the weights and the measures were rounded up in favour of the revenue. There were 3 excise officers attached to every factory to cover the 24-hour shift. The bars and padlocks and all the openings through from the hot side to the cold side were locked. The length of the shroud that you can see here, it was that long to accommodate all the shift production so that it could be assayed at the end of the shift. At a changeover of the tax officers' shifts, 2 of them actually patrolled the works together. And this was to stop officer fraud or bribery. Corruption? Surely not. The pans at the end of the shroud that had been taken through on the chains, when they were emptied, the contents were weighed and the pans were initialed before they could be taken back into the hot shop to be put on at the hot end of the leer. If the weights were wrong, they could stop the process to recheck, and this could be stopped at any time. Again, if it was stopped, nobody was earning any money. He was intensely disliked for this power. The officer in the shroud was known as the watchdog, and his office was called the dog hole or the dog house. If you've ever been in the dog house, that's where it comes from. If there was a discrepancy in the weights and measures, the owner of the factory could incur huge fines, even though he was at home asleep in bed. The tax stopped all experimenting. You couldn't add other ingredients. So it stopped experimenting with colour. And the ruby colour was particularly difficult to get right. It needed to be added. The ingredients needed to be added incrementally to check the colour. All that stopped. Other problems caused by the glass tax was it cost thousands of pounds to administer. Unlicensed glass houses or cribs started to creep in places, and they undercut the prices of the licensed makers. Exports were exempt, so there were many fraudulent export documents covering glass production that went into the home market. There were lists of charges that you could be charged with if you broke any of these rules, these tax loopholes, or the rules made to cover them. And this could lead to immediate fines or court appearances. You could be charged for making glass illegally, removing glass illegally, concealing glass to evade duty, receiving with fraudulent intent, being found in an illegal glass house or a crib. All of these could lead to imprisonment. Flint glassmakers maximised their profit with their decorative skills. The decoration added a disproportionate value compared with the weight of the product, ensuring higher profits. English glass decorating became innovative and highly skilled to add value to the glass. Not just cutting and engraving, but enamelling, gilding, etching, all sorts of decorative techniques to add value to their products, including these air twist stems. Not just a decorative feature, but lighter in weight, and they remained as a decorative feature long after the tax was abolished, such as these air twist aerial stems. These were patented by John Luxton in 1964 at Stewart's, and he actually invented a tool to speed up the process of putting in the air twists. Many glass factories moved to Ireland because there was a free trade agreement, and they also had good shipping and good transport links. By 1815, for the general public, there was a kudos to owning glass. If you owned a richly cut, heavy piece of decorated glass, That was expensive. Huge windows, that was a sign of wealth, as were greenhouses to grow produce. You were wealthy if you had a greenhouse. Thomas Hawkes was a glassmaker in Dudley Flint Glassworks in Stone Street, and they made blown and pressed glass. Now, pressed glass was particularly heavy. You needed a larger volume of heavy lead crystal into the mould to press glass. In this image, we can see Thomas Hawkes in the Dudley Arms Hotel in the marketplace. They're in the smoke room, and if you have a look at the tables, you can see glassware of jugs, hot toddies, rummers, candlesticks. In 1834, he was elected as the Member of Parliament for Dudley, and he lobbied Parliament for a repeal of the glass tax. Not suggesting for a minute he had his own interests at heart, but in the next year, in 1835, there was a commission of inquiry assembled to inquire into the effects of the unfair tax. 1 year later, 1845, and the tax was repealed. This gave a huge impetus to the industry, and particularly to the Crystal Palace exhibition in 1851. The glass was made by Chanceys, huge tons, 400 tons of glass for the Crystal Palace. Follett Osler, the chandelier maker in Broad Street, constructed this crystal fountain with 4 tons of crystal as a centrepiece for the Crystal Palace exhibition. Revenue accounts show us that in 1835, 10 years before the glass tax was repealed, the duty paid by the glass industry in the UK amounted to £748,000, equivalent to £75 million today in revenue. Assuming a rate of about 20% like today's VAT, the industry would be valued at over £400 million in today's money. That's a good indication of the size of the glass industry, based on the skills, the ingenuity and the strength of our glassmakers. See you next time.